as we are approaching the end of 2024, there is also another thing we are slowly approaching, which is the end of Season 1. And as we are getting closer to Season 2, to the beginning of 11.1, we are also getting more and more news about what is going to be into this new season, which for today will also include the possible best in slot items, the rare chase items, the mandatory picks that you might want for your trinkets, or even for some of the special weapons or rings that will be available in Season 2. Now, you've had these experiences before, the last expansion even, you know, I don't want to trigger your PTSD, of course, but talking about chase items or very valuable items, you have had things like, for example, the stat stick trinkets all throughout Dragonflight, the one from Vault, or the one from Aberrus, or the one from Amirjasil. From the raid itself, you had things like Rashok Molten Heart in Aberrus just for healers. Then you had things like Below Relos in Amirjasil, which was great for healers, not just because it was also a damaging trinket in Mythic Plus, but because it also taught range DPS to actually finally stack in melee with the rest of the group. You had melee-centric chase trinkets like Grief Torch in Vault of the Incarnates, or the lovely Storm Eater Boon, the suicide trinket which locked melee in place and got them to kill themselves, eating mechanics while they were using this trinket, as well as trinket like the Signet Brand from Smolderon, or things like the Augury, Primal Augury from Farak. In Mythic Plus, things perhaps got even worse, because then the chase item coming from Mythic Plus means you have to park yourself inside that dungeon for 5, 10, 15, 20 runs until you actually looted that trinket. We can even go an expansion further back than Dragonflight to mention the lovely inscrutable quantum device from the other side. Talking about terminal cooldowns, you had the Puzzle Box from Algetar Academy, you had the Tome of Unstable Power from Azure Vault, you had the Iridius Fragment. So all of these trinkets ended up being very, very important for many specs and wanting them to complete their best in slot set of gear in the previous expansions or previous seasons. So now that we also know what is going to be available for now, at least in Season 2, when it comes to trinkets as well as special items with special effects, we can take a look just to try to see if any of them look particularly interesting or particularly exciting as a possible best in slot item for the next season. We start on a pretty neutral tone. These are trinkets usable by all classes and all specs. You have the House of Cards, which is a primary stat trinket with a 2-minute cooldown of mastery, and its opposite, the Eye of Kezan. This is a mastery trinket with a stacking proc of primary stat. So already we have these couple of trinkets likely possibly very valuable to specs going for high mastery. One of them being a stat stick, the other one having a 2-minute cooldown on use, so lining up with your big cooldown. Gear Grinder's Spare Keys, instead it's a non-use for just big damage. It's a 2-minute cooldown that you use to do AoE damage, so likely completely irrelevant in the raid, and perhaps having more use instead in Mythic Plus. Where things get a bit more interesting perhaps is in the tank trinket category, because while the Scrapfield 9001 is a generic tank trinket where you get to activate this absorb shield and damage reduction when you drop below 75% health, which honestly also looks pretty bad because tanks will be dropping below 75% health very often, sometimes even when they are not particularly in danger, so this trinket will proc when you don't really need it, as well as the Chrome Bustable Bomb Suit having a similar effect, except this time it's on use. So this time you get to choose. You get to choose when you want to reduce your damage on a 90-second cooldown. What is relevant about this particular trinket is that for now, at the very least, is not actually flagged as a tank trinket. So basically, you can choose on a 90-second cooldown to get yourself, even at just 623 item level, a 6.3 million absorb shield. If you actually look at the myth track 6 out of 6, so in the next season it will be 678 item level, this is over a 10 million absorb shield on a 90-second cooldown. Also with the added benefit of having the splash AoE fire damage as well. So if things continue as they are, and this will continue to not be flagged as a tank-only trinket, 100% this will be used in Mythic Plus, especially as you keep going higher in key level, having practically an immunity, because a 10 million absorb shield is gigantic. Every 90 seconds will be practically mandatory for many specs. The other tank trinket, while perhaps not being too exciting, it might be exciting just to check out all of the deaths that the DPS will have when they will try to use this trinket. Because this one is a 90-second cooldown AoE splash AoE damage trinket. The cool part about this, and why it's flagged as a, tank style of trinket, is because it also increases your threat to the enemies when you use this. So I can't wait to see DPS looting this, popping their cooldowns on pull, and then using this trinket, extra aggro, and they die. That's possibly what this trinket will be known for in the next season. Now, healing trinkets. These are very relevant and something healers hope they will be very good, simply because, as you know, if you have been in a raiding guild recently, you know that the loot distribution is not exactly equal in the raid. Generally speaking, healers don't get loot. So, if you wanted a chance of getting something for you as a healer, you better hope your raid has something like the Rashok trinket from Aberrus, where you practically have to give it to a healer. Now, the first one is not very exciting. Mr. Pick Me Up is literally a main stat stick with an effect that does extra AoE healing. So it has roughly 2.5 procs per minute, and they just basically chain heal allies. That's it. So you hope that this is tuned high enough to do 5 to 6% of your overall healing and be a strong trinket, since you will very likely pick this up from the raid very early on, since no other role will be going for this trinket. The other one is a bit more interesting. The Galagio Bottle Service actually gives you practically a cooldown. It's a 90-second cooldown which gives you a channel, basically like a divine hymn. It's a 4-second channel where you are going to be healing allies over 4 seconds. It's gonna be 10 allies healed for 376,000 at 623 item level. So even if we were to upgrade this to current item level, so 639, this would be 440,000 healing for 10 allies, so it's a 4.2 million heal, which can be scaled by your crit, by your verse, if your mastery can interact with this, like if you're an evoker and your mastery can heal players at lower HP than you for more, and this can affect this trinket. It can be a 6 to 7 million heal every 90 seconds, which would be a decent enough trinket, mostly for specs that are gated by cooldowns and might not have anything to use in a particular situation. They can just use this trinket, or even better, for specs that need a lot of mana. You might be saying, why do I need to use this if my chain heals can do just as much healing? Well, because this one doesn't cost you mana, and the chain heals do. But you can practically see this trinket as a mana conservation trinket for yourself. So here's to all the healers hoping that these trinkets will actually be good, because those are the ones very likely they will get to use, at the very least early on in the raid, when they won't have priority over many other of these trinkets. Now, on to the specific trinket for intellect, strength, and agility. You have the intellect one. Florendo's Pilot Light is a 3-minute cooldown. It's our first of the big ones. This is very relevant, of course, because different DPS will line up their damage on different cooldowns. This is a bit disappointing because this 3-minute cooldown is pure damage. Normally, you are used to knowing about chase trinkets, like we mentioned, things like the Iridius Fragment having a 3-minute cooldown, or the Puzzle Box having a 3-minute cooldown, and these were stats, because you wanted your big cooldown of your spec to do even more damage. Instead, this one is a 3-minute cooldown, but it is very simply just a big one-time effect of damage, so it won't benefit too much from your major 3-minute spec cooldown. Mag's Moxie Jug is the reverse. It's a flat stat stick. You have intellect and then a stacking crit buff. So the first of the crit-focused trinkets for crit-focused specs. However, it's not a non-use, it's just a passively, growing trinket effect, cycling different stacks over and over as you crit more and more. When you move over to the agility and strength trinkets, you have 2 copies, the same for agility and strength. Z's Thug Hotline. You have a chance to summon a Goon Squad member, and when you get Bloodlust, you summon all of the members of the Goon Squad. So, again, we don't know too much other than being interested in how much damage these Goon members are going to be doing to decide if this is worth using or not. Junk Maestro's Mega Magnet is a stacking trinket where you gain more and more magnet charges, and then you can activate these magnet charges to do a bunch of damage to your primary target based on the amount of charges you had, and splash 10% of that damage in AoE. A bit more of an active trinket because it only has a 20-second cooldown, but with this short cooldown it can at least give you more freedom on when you want to use this. If it had a flat 2-minute cooldown, it would have been worse than having a 20-second cooldown but being able to say, well, I only have 26 charges instead of 30, but at least I can still use this on a particular, high priority mob, for example. The other one of the Torque's big red button is the only possibly valuable one on a 3-minute cooldown, and it's strength only because it does give you primary stat. It gives you mastery as a stationary stat and then a 3-minute cooldown on use of 10,000 strength for 15 seconds at 623 item level. And then the added effect is that your next 3 abilities will also do extra damage to the enemy, but at least you do get your primary stat effect on use every 3 minutes. These are the items that might or might not become very relevant when it comes to the raid. Then you have the possible chase items that will lock you in a particular dungeon for 10, 20, 30 or even 50 runs. The ones coming from Mythic Plus. You have the improvised C4 pacemaker, which is practically another stacking crit trinket. This one can be extended every time you crit. It lasts for 15 seconds and then you can extend it all the way up to 30 seconds long of this crit effect. The Gigazap's Zap Cap is a passive proc damage and scales well with specs that press a lot of buttons, because every time you cast 30 spells, the effect will overcharge for 15 seconds, doing 6 times as much damage. It first triples in damage because the effect itself will be doing 3 times more damage, and then it doubles because it will proc twice as fast. So it will be relevant, of course, for specs with a lot of APM. Fast pressing specs, not something like a Devastation Evoker, for example. We are back with another non-tank only Absorb Shield effect. You have the Ringing Ritual Mud, which gives you flat verse, and then every 2 minutes you can get an Absorb Shield together with a pulsing AoE damage effect on this trinket. It's much more damage and much less Absorb Shield than the previous trinket we mentioned, the one for tanks, but this might also still be used just as well. The Dark Fuse Medichopper will be the default healer trinket from Mythic Plus. You practically can command this Medichopper to attach to a particular target, giving them an Absorb Shield and Verse. And if you're healing them, you can refresh the duration of this Verse effect and also refill the Absorb Shield on this target. It might be very good in Mythic Plus for this sort of single target extra, like external, mini external to give to players. The last one of the trinkets is the Kujo's Flame Vents. It's strength and agility only. It's practically a pseudo Belorelos where you channel for 2 seconds to do AoE damage around you, with the extra flavor effects of having the extra damage effect to mechanical enemies. These are for now pretty much all of the data mine trinket effects coming from Season 2. If I had to highlight what I think are the most possibly interesting ones or valuable ones, definitely the Chrombustible Bombsuit, because of the massive Absorb Shield not being tagged for tank only, having a very high effect for healers. The Bottle Service, the channel heal effect for healers, becoming quite useful. The 3-minute cooldown trinket, because it's the only 3-minute cooldown trinket with actually primary stat effect. So for strength users, things like Unholy DK, for example, might become very, very valuable, as well as the more generic House of Cards trinket, because it is a 2-minute on-use cooldown trinket with a mastery effect. So pretty much every spec that goes for mastery that has 2-minute cooldowns will very likely go for this trinket as their default. So these are the trinkets that we can be interested in next season. We have also, however, a few of the interesting ones coming from different slots. So we have, for example, the Cloak. This is very interesting because for now this is not actually sharing any other cooldown, and this Cloak, Test Pilot's Go Pack, has an effect on a 2-minute cooldown, which increases, even just for 1 second, but it does increase your movement speed by 150%. You know, it can have its uses. You know, when you're trying to dodge a mechanic, when you're trying to make it in time for a soak, or to dodge a particular line on the ground, having this 150% more speed for 1 second is pretty good. It's off the GCD, you don't have to actually waste anything of your own abilities, and it can save your life. So it is actually a pretty good effect as things stand. Also, one of the few things that, for example, healers might get priority over because of a few of the notably not particularly movable specs like priests and like paladins might be getting more priority for this kind of cloak. Funnily enough, we will see if it is true to its name. There is going to be a two-handed weapon called Best in Slots. The reason why you wonder if it's a weapon called Best in Slots, plural, it's because it's two weapons. You can, out of combat, decide if you want this as a two-handed agility or strength mace or a two-handed intellect mace. So this could be used basically by, you know, like druids, for example, to go from guardian and resto druid, for example, and use this as a single weapon. You do have an entire genre of one-handed weapons, all from the raid, which have the vile contamination effect. So it is a 5 procs per minute effect, which does stacking damage every 3 seconds to your enemy, stacking up to 25 times. Now the funny thing is that right now the tooltip says that they do damage until the enemy's demise, and right now the tooltip itself doesn't have an end. So it is just a permanent, an unlimited, permanent stack until the enemy is defeated. And this one coming from 3 different one-handed weapons, as well as your shield, means any dual wielding spec will be able to use basically both one-handed weapons with this effect, as well as hunters, ranged hunters with their gun with this effect. The perhaps best in slot ring of the season, or perhaps not even perhaps, definitely best in slot ring for the season will be for mastery users. I know, we also went through trinkets and we already have some pretty strong mastery trinkets, and now there is a ring as well, because the Juster Diamond does have a high amount of mastery first. That's what already would make this a good ring for mastery users. What makes this even better is that you have an effect on top of this. You steal. Every 12 seconds you steal 130 of their highest secondary stat up to 10 times. But funny thing, we have this theme of RNG effects in this new season. You have a 10% chance to actually get caught as you're stealing their stats, and you instead transfer all of the accumulated stats to your ally instead. Now, the reason why this is more valuable is because the number of stats you see on this ring right now is the same as a normal ring. So the extra effect isn't coming at the cost of your stat. This ring has right now the same amount of stats a 623 item level ring would have right now in Season 1. So the extra effect, it's all free stats. It doesn't matter if the stats are yours or if you get caught in the act and you give them to someone else, they are still more stats than a normal ring would otherwise give you. So it would be an overall net positive, net increase of the amount of stats your group, your party or your raid is going to have if you are using this ring. And it would be pretty funny if the entire raid ended up having this ring and just constantly stealing each other's stats and redistributing them around. Anyways, with this being done now, we have also gone through not just the trinket effects, what could be interesting when it comes to the trinket slots, but also the special cantrips effects on different pieces of gear. For me, of course, the highlight would be this new ring, and more importantly also the new cloak with the 2-minute speed boost, mini speed boost that you will be able to have with this new cloak effect. So these are, for now, all of the more interesting data mined effect coming from items in Season 2. We'll see, of course, further tuning to many of these trinkets perhaps, or maybe the addition of new trinkets we haven't heard of yet. But for now, for today on this Monday, beginning of this new week, bridging us from one year to the next, we can say goodbye to each other. We're starting, of course, as usual, by salutating everyone for having watched this video, together with, of course, everyone who has been supporting completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, I'm just happy, you know, I don't even care about the power, I'm just happy healers have healer-only trinkets. So, no more getting stolen by some greedy, loot-addicted junkie DPS.